Well, Charles, welcome to the first annual ORTEL Awards.
It's my honor to assist you, the host, in presenting these awards.
Ryan Seacrest was unavailable.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, I'm glad to see you're not wearing a yellow vest today, Charles.
I'm not?
Right, exactly. People love that yellow vest little joke, but why don't we explain to people what the ORTELs are exactly? I don't know that anyone has ever experienced this quite before, so it should be interesting.
Sure. Well, Hollywood, as I think this is now the 75th year coming up of presenting these, and they're always out there in California. And therefore, the evaluation of this industry is always done by people who are incapable of evaluating the industry.
It's one of these big, giant, self-congratulatory events.
Right, at parties, and and it's some of the people are having more difficulty attending given their prominence in the Me Too and other scandals. But so I thought, and we thought about maybe having a shorter version. They don't have a celebrity host, so we do have two celebrity hosts.
Who are they?
I don't know. How quickly we forget.
Yeah.
That we might do this from New York, from the East Coast, and we might train our attention on one particular celebrity, in quotes, charity, and have these awards be for the most egregious aspects of the largest set of unprosecuted charity frauds ever attempted. Those being the ones surrounding the wonderful Clinton family.
Yes, well, it's too bad they couldn't join us, but perhaps you can accept the awards on their behalf in absentia. Right. It's amazing that Bill Clinton's face doesn't stick like this.
Just amazing. It's an improbable, it really is an improbable story, and I think as time passes, as the story gets written up, and moves into the mainstream, which it is, I think, already starting to do, people are going to look back on this long period, going back, I would argue, prior to Bill Clinton's presidency, and say, how in the hell did these bounders, these inveterate criminals, get away with mesmerizing the entire world for so long, having never made an honest buck? While president, they go from near bankruptcy to now being worth who knows how much money. Some say over 100 million, others suggest much more than that.
Yeah.
And none of these geniuses who are, climbing all over Paul Manafort and Donald Trump and any Republican, Mitt Romney, any Republican who may have made some money, none of these geniuses out in Hollywood or in the mainstream media here want to do essential arithmetic. And the reason is because they probably can't. They're just incapable of doing this type of analysis.
Right.
So we thought we'd help them out.
Well, it's really nice of you to do that, Charles. You're an extremely generous guy, very helpful all the time. I'm just getting the playlist ready to go right here. This is, I think, our 143rd show. Is that it?
I thought it was more like 144, but...
you might be right. Let's see here. Yes, you're right. This is the 144th episode. I've got the playlist. Oop, I forgot to lock the... color balance there, so we just had a little shift when I brought that over. But there's the playlist. People who want to review all of the information that you and I have been covering, particularly if there's anyone who is investigating this or possibly involved in the Department of Justice or law enforcement, it would be a great resource for them. This playlist on the Jason Goodman channel, they can watch every episode of Sunday with Charles and every episode of Charles ORTEL is closing in. Charles, there's been a lot of screwy business going on YouTube. You may have noticed that Crowdsource the Truth was over 80,000 earlier this week, but there's someone out there pulling some shenanigans with the subscribers on the webpage. There's a highly unscrupulous website that positions itself as an unbiased reviewer of public matters of law, lawsuits, etc. But I find it curious that it's always evaluating lawsuits against me and having a very negative spin on anything that I submit, and incredibly positive, effusive with praise for those that are suing me despite the irrelevance of their lawsuit and the lack of facts upon which they are based. This website has accused me of purchasing subscribers, which of course I have not done. I don't even know how to do that, and sure, I'm sure I could find videos that would explain how to do it. In fact, one of the people suing me has made videos about how to purchase subscribers, and it causes me to wonder, couldn't a malicious party purchase 4,000 subscribers, subscribe them to Crowdsource the Truth, and then accuse me of doing that? And then as we approach 80,000, in a frustrating type of manner, reduce the number of subscribers, almost like taunting a cat with a mouse toy. I think that might be what's going on, because it's obviously not in my interest to have it oscillate between 80,000 and 79,900. The business model of Crowdsource the Truth, of course, is that we are a viewer-supported program, and it's very important to me that people go to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth to support the program. So I will reassure everyone that I have never purchased any YouTube subscribers. I don't see the point in doing it. And somebody's messing with us, Charles.
That's not good, Jason, but thank you for maintaining this playlist, and it is indeed a useful resource, particularly, as you mentioned, for government investigators who I believe have rolled up their sleeves for many months now, not only at federal level in the United States, but at multiple state levels, and now multiple countries are training their sights on all this. And while this is an enormous amount of time to spend going through all of these, I would argue even taking 144 times 2, calling it, rounding it up to 300 hours, you probably get a lot more understanding about the guts and mechanics and spread of this gigantic set of unprosecuted scandals than you would if you tried yourself to go through the public domain and go through the versions of the Clinton Foundation filings, which are on their website. And of course, those are not the real versions. And of course, very important information is purposefully kept off that site. It's available in New York State. It's available in California. Believe it or not, it's available in India, in South Africa. It's available in the UK. It's available in Sweden and Canada. And what this is, it's really rather amusing that these folks now in Arkansas, carpetbaggers from New York, carpetbaggers from Arkansas, would think they could come into our state, you know, and lie their asses off about the true state of the foundation, and believe that nobody, I mean, there are no investigators here in New York, no people who like to look through public filings here in New York, which is one of the most important capital markets in the world, if not the most important place, where there are tons of lawyers and accountants and consultants who love doing this stuff, to think that nobody would go and actually cross-check their work. It's like the guy who, you know, has 185 mistresses around the world and thinks that he's going to get away with it forever in the era of social media. So it didn't happen according to the original plan of the Clintons, that they would just, you know, use the mushroom strategy, you know, throw a whole bunch of crap on us, put us in a closet and think we'll just be happily growing away in the dark. It didn't work that way. So we're going to shed a light on 5 particularly egregious examples of the Clinton charity fraud that are indefensible. And I think what we've been able to do here is a wider team, not just you and me, Jason, but your viewers and our many viewers and listeners and followers. We've been able, I think, to maneuver the governments in a place where they are not going to be able to say, oh, yeah, you know, we tagged them here for a $25 fine, and they promised never to do it again. That's not the way this is going to work now. They have to, you know, once you examine the facts, as we're going to take you through some of the core elements of the fraud, then once you look at the 5 examples we're going to show you today, a lot of people are already in tremendous legal jeopardy, which can only get worse. And these people, among them, are professional advisors to them, they're employees, they're possible whistleblowers. This is well past the point already where it makes sense for whistleblowers, additional whistleblowers, to come forward and prod government authorities and prod the journalists the way we are. And eventually the dam will break. It could break quickly. It may already have broken. The news of this coming week will be all about Vietnam and, to a lesser extent, speculation about Mueller. But I believe a lot of positive, from our perspective, steps have been taken. And perhaps without any further ado, after complimenting the art department.
Oh yes, well, it's a little subtle this week, Charles. I don't know if people have noticed that the famous statuette, of course, bears a striking resemblance to a very well-known fraud examiner who has appeared on this show 144 times.
I can't recognize that person.
Well,
Although I did wear a gold tie.
Ah, yes, excellent.
About as close as I would come to.
Thank you for doing that. Now, Charles, there's been a lot of shade being thrown by the Clintons. Would you say that it's a key part of the defensive strategy rather than to engage head-on the accurate allegations that you've made, bringing to light the facts of crimes? Things like, even if your 990s look okay, which in the case of the Clintons they don't, you can't solicit over $250,000 or even $250,000 for a 501c3 in the state of New York without being registered with the Bureau of Charities. It's amazing how people who have done that refuse to address that specific allegation. That's the felony.
Well, it's actually even tighter than that. The $250,000 has to do with filing a report. I think, and I don't have it in front of me, but from memory, if you mount a solicitation campaign in excess of $25,000, you have to, I believe, from memory, it's far lower than the annual reporting requirement. You have to, and you've never solicited in New York before, you've got to fill out paperwork on that report, and you also have to explain, if you're registered as a solicitation agent, there's one report. If you're not registered, there are different sets of considerations. In certain cases, you actually have to clear the text of the solicitation and why you're doing it, and do a lot of explaining. And then every subsequent solicitation, you've got to file those type of reports. And of course, the Clintons have not done that properly.
Yeah.
And I think you're thinking of somebody else, possibly. But many people think that they can, sail into this city, and because it is true that there are many high-income and wealthy people in the city who are always looking to give away money.
They want to take advantage of them.
To take advantage of that and to find these crooked bucket shops, which share common characteristics. These crooked charities tend to have multiple names that all sound the same. And so with the trick of...
Or little subdivisions and new
initiatives
things that crop out that aren't the same as the name.
Right. And so by adopting that approach, what you're able to do, if you can find a crooked banker, which is sadly you can find a crooked banker even here in New York City, or
crooked lawyers, crooked bankers,
accountants, you then open up multiple bank accounts in using these various names. And now you're in a position where what you can do is you can go to a crooked friend and you can say, listen, crooked friend, I understand you made a lot of money and you need to have a big tax deduction. Why don't you work a little deal with us, and we'll give you a piece of paper that said you gave us $1 million. And then you'll be better off to the tune of however that helps your taxes.
Right.
And of course, we now have you as part of the scheme, right. So we can turn you in if we wanted to. And they have us as part of the scheme. So there are many different ways to play these charity frauds. And where the most likely location for charity frauds is in high-tax states like New York and California, Massachusetts, Illinois, which have very high personal income, and Washington, D.C., very high personal income tax rates. And there are classic opportunities, in quotes, for moving money around the world. I mean, you go to a poor country, they might have laws on the books about charities, and maybe they say you have to do this and they say you have to do that, but you waltz into a poor country as Bill Gates or supposedly this rich Clinton Foundation saying you want to give away $50 million. It's not like the politicians are saying, well, let's make this guy's life miserable. No, they're like, I'll tell you what, why don't you give $50 million? You probably need a government partner.
Yeah.
We'll take care of a lot of that. So just send that money to me.
Right.
And so charities really, I think, I've been saying this for about 10 years now, that the investment world, the corporate world is a rough place, but at least you know that the sensible people in that world are very interested in making, keeping, and appropriating as much of the profit of the enterprise as they can reasonably get away with doing. That's what they're trying. And people are very focused on the difference between your revenues and your expenses, your cash outflows, your cash inflows. They're very focused on that. They fight endlessly about the result. There are multiple people with sharp pencils or whatever they use.
Stab
pencils.
in the throat.
Yeah. No, to make sure that we really know how much revenue went to the company. You know, it's very seldom do you see in the for-profit world, though it's happened. It happened in Reebok in India, where you know a country manager or the president of a country would say, "All right, I'll take care of this," and then report into headquarters somewhere and say, "Yeah, we made $1 billion this year in revenues." When the truth is, you made $5 billion. You just didn't declare $4 billion to headquarters and you just stole it. I mean, it's very tough to do that in the for-profit world because there are a lot of people trying to find that money. Not just in the government, but in the company. And there are a lot of jealous people fighting. As you know, you go into a big company, it gets...
Well, there'd be other factors too. Like it could be like, wait a minute, how did we produce all these shoes, but it's only $1 billion? Whereas charity, it's like, oh wow, this person came and unexpectedly gave $500 million. Let's just not say anything about it.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And then you marry it up with things that most people are not. I mean, very few people, believe it or not, even today in this rich country, very few people have a passport and travel. They don't have the experience of. Very few people have experience of putting together sets of accounts. When you start putting together sets of accounts for a company that is involved in more than one currency, more than one location, it's really complicated because the currency exchange rates move during the year. You know, you could have a country, the joke was Zimbabwe for a long time, where you knew the currency was going to go down in value against the dollar. So it matters a lot when you translate, let's say somebody gives you dollars that you're going to spend in Zimbabwe. At the beginning of the year, you get maybe just a few Zimbabwe dollars, but by the end of the year, for $1, you get the whole country. And so it matters a lot, you know, when you actually transfer that money. Right. It matters a lot how you think through your assets and liabilities as they're moving around the world, and there should be a line in something like this. It's very complicated, the Clinton Foundation, with many operations in theory all over the world. There should be a line, currency exchange gains and losses every year, and there isn't in the earlier years, which is ridiculous. You know, it's clear that there's a lot, in my view, if you consider all the contours of it, it's a lot like Enron and the barge deal, you know, where they didn't really consistently account period by period for what was in this transaction, who had the economic substance of the risk and the opportunity, and it's fiction.
What was the barge deal? They had some power generating thing on a barge?
It was a Nigerian barge deal from memory, and that's just how I remember
Some
it.
kind of power plant on a barge or something. But isn't it interesting, Charles, that Christopher Wray and Robert Mueller were involved with Enron, and here they are again. So few people care about anything other than, does this person hate Trump? Okay, rah, rah. It's like, what's this guy's background? What are these guys all doing here, and why are they so adamant to gum up the works and prevent anything from actually happening?
You're absolutely right. And the other thing that's very clear about this whole set of tactics is whenever the Clintons, the Obamas, the Muellers want you to focus on one thing over here that looks bad, it's typically because they don't want you to look across the room in the other direction at something that's even worse. So Mueller, Wray, the special counsel team, Comey, Clinton, the Bushes, the Obamas, have all been involved selling this crock of shit idea of globalism, unregulated globalism, which you'll see in this presentation. I'm not calling it feudalism. F-U-T-I-L.
Futile.
It's futile.
That's very good, Charles. You know, one question I wanted to ask you before we get underway. So you and I have been doing this for, we're coming up on a year, right?
2 years.
2 years, coming up on my time flies. But when you set out to do this, did you have a time frame in mind? You know, people are always saying, when is Charles going to do something? Like, what more could you and I do? We can't prompt the DOJ. We don't have the power to go impanel grand juries and arrest people.
Yet.
Right. This is all we can do.
So we may have to throw our hats into the Democratic primary ring.
I say that's a great idea.
I mean, if Randy Credico could do it.
Did he?
Not for president, but he runs for Senate. And governor or whatever. But
Senator of Kokainistan.
Right. But as to this, I mean, my idea all along here has been to document the extent, the mania to which Americans and people in the richest countries of the world succumbed in a series of books. That's been my objective, and to put enough information out there to motivate these governments to actually come in and do something about it. So what we're doing, this is now feudalism or unregulated globalism, this is its 30th year, or 31st year actually. And so there are people, I mean 31 years is a hell of a long time to try an experiment that has fundamentally, in my view, decimated the middle class, particularly in the richer countries where wages are expensive or humans can be replaced. It's decimated the working class. It has the companion thought of lowering interest rates and having these gigantic budget deficits has created a bunch of debt-addicted people in these countries who cover off the losses in their income by just borrowing more money to buy assets which they hope will appreciate and which have appreciated in theory. So this is a gigantic experiment that there's a lot of evidence for. There are a lot of people invested in saying this is a good idea, and those people are basically the establishment. So the people who give out the fancy degrees at Yale, Harvard, Princeton, NYU, and elsewhere, they're all in for this feudalism and unregulated globalism because it has created a gigantic imbalance in the demand for scarce seats at the campuses. It creates a gigantic demand for professors and experts and nitwits running around in conferences, writing books about garbage, saying that that globalism works and anybody who would criticize it is an idiot. These peer-reviewed papers, a third of which, by some estimation, are completely false out of these campuses.
Oh yeah.
You got all that. You got the media people. The fake news CNN, and somebody, I think this is fake news actually, is floating the theory that Jussie Smollett's going to now get a show on CNN. I think that's fake news.
I would believe it, though.
But so the whole globalist, the whole media powers that be, and social media, they're all in for globalism. If it's unregulated,
Right.
If nobody in social media checks to see just how much valuable personal data indeed is being harvested, even though Mark Zuckerberg and other people said that would not happen,
Well, why would he lie?
Exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah. So you have the media world all in for it. You have the investment world all in for it, because if you go from a company that's only going to serve the Northeast in America to a company that could serve the entire world from Manhattan, suddenly you've got a business proposition that's a lot more valuable. Banks are a lot happier. They're all in for unregulated feudalism or globalism.
Sorry, rule the world, did you say, John? Oh, serve the world, right.
And then you have the politicians, and the politicians I've come to understand here. Why don't you ask me, why is this going to take so long? When you go and you look at the FBI vault files and you look at the testimony of the top FBI guys, which is a premier investigating body, the leadership, you find them ordinarily saying, well, we decided to launch this investigation because we read about it in the newspaper, or we saw it on television, or we got a tip. It's, what are these people actually doing in the Federal Bureau of Let's Not Bother to Investigate, charity fraud? I mean, it's
Did you see this graphic on the FBI vault, Charles? It looks remarkably like a singular eyeball, the all-seeing eye.
I did not. But so I decided, and I think we decided to do this so that we would serve this meat out twice a week, typically, sometimes more than that, sometimes less than that, twice a week, so it would be out there in the public domain so that people couldn't say they hadn't looked at it when the hammer actually drops. And I think by now, I'm pretty certain that there are serious investigations going on around the world into this, and the pressures are mounting. I think also Donald Trump, in theory, would like to be reelected. We haven't heard him officially open a reelection campaign, but in theory, he'd like to be reelected, and I don't think there's any way on earth that he wins unless he makes a good faith effort to drain the swamp prior to November of 2020. So there's
so when you say good effort to drain the swamp, what would you consider that? Hashtag lock her up?
I think, you know, let's convene grand juries into this matter, and let's see what indictments result inside the United States. With that happening, around the world, people who've been waiting to do something, but who've been held back because their senior leadership says, look, the United States isn't going to do anything. Why should we get in front of this freight train? So the second these indictments are made public, and I hope some have already been issued and are sealed, but the second they become public, then Donald Trump will have a gigantic global stage. He already has one, but he'll have an opportunity to go and say, listen, you know, for 2 years, Mueller and his ragtag team have been off the reservation, literally, not with Hiawatha, not on that reservation, but they've been off the reservation, charging after their perceived enemies without actually articulating a crime.
It's amazing.
And here we have, you know, these 144 videos and many interviews I've done and other things that other people have done. Peter Schweitzer started it off, actually, back in 2015. There's a lot of evidence out there, and there are at least 2 people I can name off the top of my head. Corinne Brown and Steve Stockman are in prison for, in financial terms, trivial frauds compared to this Clinton Foundation for $1 million each or so. And yet these Clintons, you know, seriously believe that they're going to start meddling and again rigging the 2020 election, and that Hillary's going to be maybe waiting in the wings, let all these people who've announced in the beginning, you know, shoot themselves, and then she or Michelle or both of them will try to swoop in at the last minute and take on Donald Trump yet again.
I think that would be a formidable challenge if Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama ran on a single ticket. I think there would be a lot of people that would vote for them. I'm
speechless.
I'm not one of them, but
the so-called ebony and ivory ticket. I mean, I just don't think Hillary Clinton is so. I mean, first of all, who would be running as president?
I think it would be Hillary.
That's not happening.
She could croak, and then Michelle would take over.
That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. I think there's a lot of bad blood between the 2 of them.
Oh, is that right?
I don't know, but I just suspect there's
And what about Bernie? We've got a lot of people. I mean, Bernie, it's just voting for Bernie in 2020 or even following or supporting him seems remarkably like getting back together with an ex-girlfriend, and I just don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, if Hillary were running Bernie's campaign, they'd probably have, you know, they'd probably use the ad copy from Ageless Male or something. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's the Methuselah wing of the Democratic Party. It's crazy.
But it is interesting to watch the Becks and their response to Bernie re-entering the race. Jared Beck, of course, has been banned from Twitter. There's now an AI Jared Beck, which has nothing to do with the real Jared Beck, but is humorous. Jared is adamantly against supporting Bernie, and I think that the Becks lawsuit, even though it hasn't been successful in winning money back from the fraud that was perpetrated, I think it has been successful in showing that it's not so much a matter of Bernie was cheated by the DNC, because I think if that were true, he would have embraced the fraud lawsuit that the Becks have been prosecuting for more than 2 years. And the fact that he's totally ignored it, not even commenting on it or supporting it in any way, I think bolsters as well as some of the research that Jan Weinberg has done, bolsters the theory that Bernie was part of this charade, and he may have been forced or coerced to do it, but I do not believe that Bernie was cheated. I believe that Bernie was used, Bernie was a pawn, but again, I think supporting him in 2020 is a futile effort, and I certainly will be voting for Donald Trump unless, of course, as you say, he fails to do anything in the next 18 or 20 months or whatever it is that we have to get these Clintons brought to justice.
Yeah, and you start pulling on these strings here. I mean, we're focused. You have to, something as big a target as this, you have to stay focused over the target. But every day I do additional work on different elements of this fraud, and there are a lot of crooked foundations that have taken money from this Clinton Foundation or given money to the Clinton Foundation or its various entities. There are lots of small initiatives we haven't even talked about yet. This Too Small to Fail, which is a ridiculous name to begin with, the full participation project. The
Who's too small to fail?
That's one of their projects, Too Small to Fail. It's just
about kids, you mean?
I don't know. It's what it's about, actually, what they say it's about.
So you're either too small to fail,
Or too big.
too big to fail, or just the right size for Robert Mueller to kick in your door and cause you to fail whether or not you deserve to.
Right. So I suppose with no further ado, we might...
Because it was a lot of ado. I
yeah,
apologize.
we just did a lot of ado. So we're on page 2.
You want to go to page 2?
Yeah. So page 2, to remind people and to explain to the new viewers that, and you do every week, I think, get new viewers. This is an exercise. It's not simply you and I lecturing to the people out there. This is an exhortation to action. I don't want to call it a commitment to action, but it's we're in a place, I think, in the American and global body politic where members of this audience can make a huge difference. Sending these presentations around, telling your friends about what we're doing, and urging people who could mount prosecutions to actually mount prosecutions and get them across the line. I know when I started on this with General Electric in 2007, people originally thought I was super crazy for trying to go after General Electric, because at the time it had a combined value of all of its equity and all of its debt. So-called enterprise value was nearly $1 trillion in 2007. And now it's a tiny fraction of that at this point. And I alerted people back then. I said, look, it's a massive potential fraud, and you need to tread carefully. And it's not simply the issue with GE. It was not simply GE itself, but that if a company as big as GE and as, in theory, visible and regulated and watched could come apart, what does that say about the treacherous ground on which all companies and individuals walk today in this unregulated feudalism or globalism? So I started with that, and that only took, really it took about a year for it to go from being you're crazy, ORTEL, to whoa, we got a problem here. And then, then there was a lot invested, I would argue, fairly so. Once Barack Obama won in 2008, there was a lot of goodwill around the world to try to do whatever it took to make sure that the global system didn't collapse. And with all that goodwill, the quantitative easing, deficit spending, lowering interest rates, all that stuff, that provided a cushion for GE's fall. But in last year, we picked up the baton again, beating up GE, and the stock is now on the floor. Its equity used to be worth $400 billion. Its equity is now worth $100 billion.
Ooh.
And between 2007 and 2019, there are some companies that went from nothing to being worth, $100 billion, $200 billion, et cetera. So in a period of time where prices, with the exception of the 2007 to 9 downdraft, many stock prices went way up. GE's has gone way down. It's suffered perennial management changes now at the top and the middle levels. GE is certainly politically powerful, or was politically powerful around the world. But in going up against the Clintons, going up against this Clinton charity fraud, we're not just taking on Democrats, we're taking on corruptocrats, the corrupt people who are happy to take government money or engage in the process of raising money from the public to help a donor or to make sure the government doesn't attack a donor. We're going after people in both elements of, or the major elements of the political system. So Republicans, Democrats, there are corrupt independents as well. So this is not going to be an easy task to get it across the line. But I think, like GE, once the indictments happen, once grand juries flex their muscles, and once first blood is tasted, there's a lot of ground has been prepared here, and this will, I think, become a raging inferno that will help dry out and clean out the swamp, particularly if Donald Trump focuses his attempts on Washington, D.C., on the IRS, as regards this fraud, and on the high-tax states that have provided cover for this fraud. I think the ground is well set, and perhaps we can dive a little bit more into some details and take people through it.
Not to be too ADD, Charles, but someone in our comments section is letting us know that a 767 with GE engines just crashed off of Houston. I had heard this was an Amazon
Prime thing, yeah.
cargo plane of somebody nosedived into shallow water. That's not good. 3 people were killed, so
Yeah.
not good. We don't
Not
like to
good.
hear about that.
Sorry to hear that.
Yes. Now, okay, so, but the other thing we should mention, Charles, is that people who want to follow you on Twitter or direct message you there can do that. You're on Twitter at Charles Ortel, tweeting about some of the stuff, in fact, that we'll be speaking on during the broadcast here. One of our favorite nitwits, Ocasio-Cortez, who's now emboldened by her internet popularity and taken to the popular stance of, if you don't like it, F.O.
Well, I would remind her, she probably is not all that familiar with the fate of John Edwards. I don't know if you remember, John Edwards
Didn't he cheat on his wife while she had cancer?
Oh yeah, yeah. But in the beginning, John Edwards in the 2008 presidential cycle was looking very strong. I mean, people thought
Right.
that he was, and then wasn't he in 2004? He wasn't he Kerry's running mate?
Yep.
He was. And then he went through the primary, and that didn't go so well in 2008, and the scandal about his ex-wife came out. And it reached a low point where he was caught sitting by the bar.
Something with the police?
Well, he was sitting at some skanky bar somewhere, getting loaded and telling people, "You're not going to believe this, but I was actually the Democratic Party's vice presidential candidate." In the bar, and people say, "You know what? We don't believe it. Get out of here." So that you could go from being an internet sensation in politics to being somebody who is not going to be taken seriously ever again. And she is, if she keeps this track record going, she could well be cruising for a serious political bruising.
Yeah, I just think she's like a unlicensed driver at the wheel of a car racing down the street about to crash. Let's hope that doesn't hit any other cars.
That's true.
And with that, Charles, the next page.
Sure. This first story is extremely important. It was in Town Hall, and I think we're getting a lot of negative reaction to McCabe, who is a distinctly unlikable human being in my view. And it says here, deplorable McCabe enabled by dormant, see that? Dormant Pelly. Yeah. I would have changed that word to doormat. Pelly, not dormant. But maybe that's a typo, actually. I don't think for a second that this McCabe here Andrew McCabe did any of these major things that he's confessing to so far without running them by either Valerie Jarrett, the president himself, perhaps certainly the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General under, back when he was in the FBI, prior to Trump's election. I think a lot of those activities and the game plan for resistance had been thought through and devised well before the November 2016 election. So the real story here is not, I don't think, to focus on 2017, what he was doing as acting director, but far more, what are the roots of this? For how long have James Comey and Robert Mueller and Rod Rosenstein and other persons as yet unknown inside the IRS, inside the Justice Department, inside various places where prosecutorial discretion matters a lot, for how long have those people been targeting or threatening enemies of unregulated globalism, friends, helping out friends of the Clintons, the Obamas, and the Bushes? How long has this been going on? And that's where, if we had, if this guy Pelly and CBS, which we know CBS is a complete joke. I mean, Les Monvis had to get bounced out of there. The top guy at 60 Minutes was bounced out of there. And I know from the 60 Minutes brief experience I had many years ago trying to do something on 60 Minutes, that the way in which 60 Minutes airs its shows, I would argue, is fundamentally dishonest.
Ooh.
Fundamentally dishonest. What we do is just live, right?
Uncut.
Exactly. And if we had a big budget and we were working at CBS, I'd insist we do it the same way, because
Yeah.
you don't want, we're able to give fresh information because we don't have to, we check our work carefully, but we don't have to send it up the food chain and down to legal and over here. And the way these guys do it is they would film, let's say you, for a couple hours, and they would think about your responses, and then they would go film Pelly. He would come up with questions that they'd weave into your answers after he knew your answer.
It's almost like a Howard Stern.
But that's how they do it. That's how they do. Most 60-minute shows are that way.
Did you ever see where Howard Stern will take like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and cut up all the dialogue and then do an interview with Schwarzenegger and he gives ridiculous answers? But I mean, in all seriousness, it speaks to the things that you can do to manipulate the perception of something by doing that, by cutting it. And Charles, how long until they use that deep fake technology to change what somebody says? Not saying that they did that with Andrew McCabe, but didn't Andrew McCabe say at one point that if they try to prosecute him, he's going to burn down the town? I made this graphic for the True Pundit show that we do on Tuesday nights at 8 on patreon.com, More Pain, which shows our friend Andrew McCabe holding an Elon Musk flamethrower and burning down the town.
Yeah, I mean, it's a ridiculous proposition, and at this point, we now have, I don't know the year that the FBI was founded, but certainly under Comey, under Mueller, the leadership of the FBI has absolutely not distinguished itself. It's quite the reverse. I think there is a gigantic feeling spread around the country and around the world that the FBI has run amok, and that there's one set of rules for the people at the very top of the FBI, and there's another set of rules for Paul Manafort and others.
July 26, 1908.
All right, a while back.
Yeah, so it's a good 111 years, and now they figure, let's burn it out.
Well, I think, I'm not saying we shouldn't have a very strong national investigative force. I think given the power of our rivals and dread enemies, we need such a force. Do we need 17 security agencies?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Don't other countries typically have a foreign intelligence service and a domestic intelligence service and just like leave it at that? Like maybe FBI for here and CIA for everywhere else?
Well, I think a lot of, we're an unusual country, but a lot of the bigger countries for day-to-day police work rely on local sheriffs and constables for more limits. So those people will be more familiar with the residents, and if it's a tourist-intensive place, the frequent visitors, and a lot of the policing gets done at that level. Then there's a question of beyond that, what sort of national force might we need to investigate the more complex crimes? And here, with this FBI, if their hearings are required for anything, it's very much, I think, required for what happened in the FBI, particularly in the in a period of time from the Patriot Act forward, where technology has grown ever more powerful, and where the temptation for the authorities to say we're fighting all of these threats that are so dire. If you knew the truth, it would frighten you. You wouldn't be able to sleep. That kind of argument is just that you cannot stand.
Yeah.
I mean, people go to horror movies, they contemplate we all have to die in the end. We contemplate, very tough problems. There isn't a threat scary enough that it shouldn't be shared with this country.
Well, I think what they're saying is that if you knew the truth, we'd be in serious trouble.
Right, exactly. That's exactly.
So they don't want people to know about that. So, but then we had this story, Charles. This is shocking. I hadn't seen this before you brought it to my attention, although I suspected it.
Well, it's a lengthy story worth, and obviously it's from the teaparty.org, so people are going to be howling, saying this is outrageous, but it's an interesting, lengthy piece where it's taking you down the rabbit hole of saying there is a group of people, and I'd argue George Soros has spent much of his professional career destabilizing countries and currencies and profiting from doing that. There is an element in this country that is super interested in stoking division
Yeah.
And it's not the Tea Party. It's Antifa, it's George Soros, it's people who want the narrative to be at a time where economic opportunity, in fact, is rising for ethnic minorities, for women. Unemployment's at an all-time low. New business creation for these minority groups is on a tear, even in arguably challenging current conditions. There's a group of people who would like to see, white versus black, black versus Hispanic, gay versus straight, rich versus poor, et cetera. They feed off of this, how they raise money for their political campaigns and for their contributions to their NGOs, the Southern Poverty Law Center, et cetera.
Right.
And I think we have to be smarter than that. I mean, there's a lot going on in this country that is super good compared to much of the rest of the world, where we have much higher incomes, much more wealth. Everything having to do with economics and talent is distributed inequitably. It's not like, everybody who goes, you go down to a Broadway show and you could say, all right, the cast
is everybody in the audience.
Yeah, just get rid of those people in the cast. And why don't you over here, you play the lead, you're the supporting person. It's not like that's
You're
the way
there to see the exceptional people who are great at singing.
Right, or dancing. And then you go to a basketball game, it's like, sit down. That team over there, the Knicks, get out. Maybe they should sit down, but sit down and, we'll put Jason in the center and Charles could be the, whatever.
Right.
That's not the way it works. So talent, particularly in globally intensely competitive industries and areas, is talent does rise to the top. And
as it should.
As it should. And in certain cases, I would argue actually, and I've heard this said, that when you speak of writing English, let's just say, you get to a certain point, and one writer is, there'll be some particularly distinctive writers who are fantastic, and there are other distinctive writers who are atrocious, but people say they're fantastic because that's what they have to do. But there's, a lot of people could be successful writing great books. I don't think that's true directing movies or inventing scripts and stuff like that, but a lot of people can sit down and power, given the way we're trained. You have to go through a high school and grammar school and college.
Create at least one book about something.
Something, yeah. Particularly if you stick to an area where you have expertise and experience. Right. But talent is not equally distributed, and so what people like Soros and others do is they like to stir up trouble.
That's his talent, Charles.
That's his talent. He's a troublemaker, and there are others like him, Mark Rich as well. And if you know trouble's coming to a stock market or a debt market or a country, you can make big money causing trouble. Mm-hmm. And it would seem to me that if there's a role for governments to regulate anything, it should be to, taking the incentives for troublemakers to loot countries. Those incentives need to be taken out of the system. Special taxes, special regulatory action. If you have a pattern and practice of, let's just say, never having done anything positive in your life in the for-profit world, as the Clintons, it was their case, and suddenly, you're profiting from the biggest charity fraud ever attempted, and you're living like a king, private jets, mansions. But that example can't let stand. You just can't let it stand.
I hope, Charles, when the Clintons are finally in jail and all this is behind us, you can perhaps turn your attention to some of the higher profile insurance frauds or potential insurance frauds that are linked to some of these events, because there always seem to be stock short sales surrounding companies involved in things like 9/11, Las Vegas shooting, California fires. David Hawkins has been speaking a lot about catastrophe bonds that are amazingly brought out just months before these massive catastrophes happen, that seem so outside the realm of possibility that the payout of these bonds is so huge, it's unbelievable. It's a strange coincidence for sure.
It's a sad fact that fraud is endemic to the human condition. And it's also a sad fact that the major investigative body in this country, the FBI and our Department of, quote, Justice, is not more aggressive going after these frauds. We need to make examples of these people. Yeah. Now, also a sad fact, if we hit this, here's something from Axios. And I got to tell you, Axios, that must stand for Designated Recipient of All Leaks. but I know it doesn't stand for that. But I mean, here's an 800-page sentencing
That's crazy.
memo for Paul Manafort. If you go down the page a little bit, this came out, and if you want to read it, there it is.
I mean, 800
This
pages.
is I guess this is a summary. It's at 20. This is page 1 of 25.
The title of it is redacted? Like what?
I guess.
That's weird.
I guess with attachments at 800. So, but I mean, how did this end up with Axios? Of all people, of all the places in the world, why did Axios get this?
Yeah, because you know, it doesn't look like they got it off of Pacer. That would have sort of like a blue, once it's publicly filed and you go to the public access of court electronic records, it would have this kind of like blue print across the top of how it's entered in the docket and all that. So yeah, it's a good question.
Right. And so we can be sure, if we go back into the text here, we can be very sure that whatever Mueller does produce is going to leak right out, you know, in ways it shouldn't leak right out. And I don't think that we want the system to stand with the precedent that somebody like Rosenstein, who, you know, is a highly questionable individual in my view, can make Mueller God from a prosecutorial standpoint. They put him on a pedestal and say, all right, whatever you want to do, you do. You don't report to anybody. You've got a budget, your own budget, whatever you need, it's fine. You can take on the president, anybody you want, and that's the way it works. I mean, who appointed Rod Rosenstein God? You know?
Didn't he also have something going on where his wife was working on uranium-1 or something? So all these guys have all these weird connections to all kinds of different things.
Well, yeah, Rosenstein, and the whole issue, I'm not all in favor. You know, when my ex-wife was working, we were together, you know, we both had nice jobs, and it's great if you have two people making a lot of money.
Not if one of them is covering up the crimes the other ones do.
Right. I'm saying I'm not against two career couples, but I am against, in the political world, one couple who's supposedly a public servant, now Hillary Clinton, and another who is a professional charity fraudster, Bill Clinton, with his daughter. I got a real problem with that, and I got a real problem with the government not enforcing the Foreign Agents Registration Act against the Clinton Foundation and not enforcing the public corruption issues against the Clintons for long periods of time. Now, this is really interesting, this Epstein plea agreement.
Yeah.
Now, there's literally nothing on last night that I could watch. So I found myself, I said, well, if there's nothing on I can watch, why don't I watch MSNBC? You know, and see how bad it is.
It's bad.
It's really, really bad. But they are ginning up this reopening of the Epstein plea agreement as something that's going to damage Trump. I actually think this is going to damage the Clintons.
Well, but Trump did appoint that guy Acosta to the, he was the U.S. attorney in Miami who gave this sweetheart deal to Epstein.
Right.
I don't know. This is a third rail right here.
I don't know. I maybe not. I think what's more interesting is Epstein as we've said in prior shows, Epstein in his sentencing agreement or memorandum from his lawyers to the judge, he took credit for creating the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Global Initiative.
Epstein did?
Epstein did. His lawyers did. Said,
wow.
Yeah, he's done remarkable charitable work. He created the Clinton Global Initiative. Well, that's
How did he do that?
He did. He flew around with Bill. He led one of his jets to Bill Clinton. They flew around the world together, and afterwards, Clinton Global Initiative did come together. But that's not something to brag about, because that itself is perhaps the biggest element of this charity fraud is the Clinton Global Initiative. So I think when you pull hard on the various and sundry strings that are connected to Epstein, perhaps something bad will come, some dirt will fall on Trump. But I believe that from memory, Donald Trump either kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, or there was some issue with what Epstein was doing at Mar-a-Lago.
I think the whole Epstein issue needs a lot more attention. I had the opportunity to speak to Derek Brose at Anarchapulco, and he's an independent journalist who's done a lot of really good work in this area. And he's unbiased as far as, he doesn't support Trump, he doesn't support Clinton. He's just looking at the evidence and the details, and I think he does a good job of remaining unbiased. I think we're going to hear a lot more about this, but it is interesting that it's come about. I have to say, I think the work that Derek and other people in the independent news media have been doing are pressing on this, and hopefully part of the reason why maybe something will happen.
Yeah, and this is rich, this comment from the Pope. I mean, the Pope compares child sex abuse to human sacrifice. I mean, if there's one...
How is that better?
If there's one person who probably should pick a different topic at the minute to talk about, it's the leader of the Catholic Church. And with the lawsuits now in archdiocese after archdiocese and across the United States and now around the world, this is not, and that book that came out that may or may not be true, but it's alleging that 80% of the church leadership is, closeted homosexual, engaged in, abuse, frankly. And
well, but he's speaking out against it here, isn't it? I mean, he's saying...
I know, that's like Al Capone speaking out against tax fraud. I mean,
right.
it's like, I'm not sure that or Bill Clinton, leading a feminist movement. I mean, it's just not,
right.
It's not, I suppose this gentleman answers perhaps to only one boss, but is in theory very powerful, but maybe he doesn't take advice from any human. But I would definitely...
Next topic for him.
Yeah, a different topic. Here's a story that came out today. Well, that's actually, it's okay, you can hit that. Oh, the first one came out earlier, saying that Ben Bernanke, by his quantitative easing and the tricks that he allowed to happen when he was Federal Reserve Chair, killed the global economy. And this is 2019. If you hit the link underneath this one,
back on the
slide.
Perhaps, Charles, quantitative easing has indirectly led to qualitative easing.
Right. You'll see that this is Accuracy in Media interviewed some nut, that would be me, where I said on November 5th, 2010, that these activities bordered on the criminal. And I stick by my guns. Accuracy in Media is, they go after the right and the left. Some find Cliff Kincaid to be a little bit prickly. I actually enjoy his perspectives. But I agree. I think Ben Bernanke and the moves that were taken under Obama, really first under Bush at the tail end of his second presidential term, and then under Barack Obama, the moves that were taken have only delayed the day of reckoning and made it at least $10 trillion more expensive to deal with.
Doesn't sound good, Charles.
It's not. Now we have also this Brexit. Now, I have always been trained and found it to be a good thing that when you see, unlike Soros, I don't try to create crises, but when you see a crisis happening, and certainly Brexit is a crisis at the moment, it's an unresolved crisis, that's a good place to start if you're a long-term investor, good place to start thinking about, are there deals, investment deals on the horizon, public securities, debt, otherwise, that will come out of the United Kingdom's emergence into some new format. I think what they will end up being is they will stand at the center of many former British Empire countries that are now independent. There's something called the Commonwealth Group of countries that are all countries that at one point were part of the British Empire. I'm not suggesting they put an empire back together, but there's common legal traditions, there's long-standing deep ties amongst these various countries, and there can be a kind of special relationship similar to the productive one that the United States and the UK have had for many decades, and that could spread beyond Britain itself to many, many other countries that have wealthy, higher income, and even emerging populations. So I look at this actually as a plus for it'll be birthing pains, it'll be difficult. The European Union is not going to end up just saying, oh yeah, do what you want, we're not going to hurt you. But in the end, the UK will be a lot better off for Brexit, in my opinion. And so in this turmoil now, if people have spare money and they want to start thinking about equities to invest in, it would be smart to pick over the UK companies to find those that are export-oriented, that are well-capitalized, that is, they don't have too much debt, they have good profit margins, good cash flows. I myself am going to do a little bit of looking at that.
I hear you can pick up Capital Alpha security for just £2. Sure.
That's right,
It's only going up. It's only going up.
The whole thing. I've been on with this Press TV, which is an Iranian operation, and here we see this story on Zero Hedge again today that supposedly they hacked into CENTCOM.
Yes, that was crazy and crashed the drones.
Right, and you're just like, you are punching a tiger when you do that, Iran. I mean, they don't seem to understand in this country, in Iran, that I don't know how many people they have. I want to say it's less than 100 million. We have over 325 million. Forget about disparities in wealth. Forget about the fact you're under sanctions. You really want to do this?
But Charles, how do they know? I mean, anytime I see a story like this, my first question is, how do we know? Because a hack is inherently, someone is up to something tricky. Couldn't someone, say an ethical hacker, hack into that thing and somehow make it look like Iran did it to achieve an outcome? I think there's a lot of tricky people out there, Charles, who like to hack things and blame it on other people.
True, but I think for 40 years, Iran and the U.S. have had desperately poor relations. And worse than that, for 40 years, the Iranian people have been under the thumb of, talk about unregulated globalism, we're talking there about unregulated corruption or legalized corruption and thugocracy in that country. And it's not up for the United States to decide what happens in any other country. But you're going to challenge us around the world, as the Iranians have. You're going to put our troops in harm's way, kill our troops. Comes a point where the United States has to do something about it. I'm not advocating war with Iran. What I am advocating, though, is back-channel discussions, much as those that preceded the current diplomatic path that we see the United States being on with North Korea. Such back-channel negotiations deserve to be happening for the people of Iran, for the people of this country. Because imagine if we're able to negotiate a peace between South Korea, North Korea, and the U.S., and then get North Korea on a plan, on a path towards productive, engaged economic behavior.
Not nuking people.
Not nuking people. It'd be very good for their people, very good for that portion of the world, very good for lessening global hostilities. And now you see what's playing out in Venezuela playing out. We'll see which way that ball bounces.
I've got a tendency to not trust these things right out of the barrel. I did a show with Scott Bennett just the other day about this U.S. Air Force counterintelligence specialist who's been accused of spying, Monica Witt.
Right.
And Scott pointed out a number of things about the case that don't quite add up and seem to be, sort of fake news trying to get people to, you put something like that out. We haven't heard anything from this woman. It's the first I've ever heard of the story. I just always find myself wondering, how do we know if this is true? Or how do we know if this is just a piece of nonsense planted there by the John Bolton types who want to have a war with Iraq?
Mm. Well, on a less serious note, 3 funny exit points, and then we'll get into the awards themselves. This is from the Take the Last Train to Tokyo department.
Ocasio-Cortez building a train to Tokyo, Charles?
Well, that was her idea.
Oh my God, she is.
I mean, how do you let yourself, you're doing a bit too much PR if you let this type of an article get written. I mean, and it seems to be that she's been on this, I don't even know how to pronounce it. Is that Dessous and Mero? Some new Showtime thing. It's a new thing. But she actually does an interview, and this is a comedy show.
Oh, wait a minute. A friend of mine was at that taping and was texting me saying, hey, I'm listening to your favorite idiot speak. And I was like, well, I have a few favorites. Who is it?
But again, this is not going to end up working very well for her.
Oh boy, Ocasio-Cortez, Charles.
Yeah, and then we have another one.
Maybe she could power the train by cow farts.
I saw this on, I think it was Free Republic, and right away I realized it's a parody.
Mm-hmm.
But on the heels of the Jussie Smollett experience, did you hear about this, Jason?
2 men in colonial outfits. That's pretty funny.
I think that definitely did not happen. But look, is this right? 469,000 shares.
It's amazing how people enjoy fake news.
Right.
Wow. That's just crazy. I wonder, was she drinking a beer?
She was simply on her evening walk with her favorite peyote blend and fired muskets at her. Oh, that's pretty funny.
Oh, that is pretty funny. Good to hear that Elizabeth Warren is stuck in the mud as far as the campaign goes.
Yeah, and then we have this one. This is in the not even a fair fight department. I mean, when Senator Feinstein is debating children on climate change.
Yeah, they really should take some pity on her. She has no chance
He has
against the
no
children.
I know. It really is.
She said, so U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein and a group of San Francisco Bay Area students squared off. Tense exchange. Wow. I'll have to watch that.
It's a good thing it was a gun-free zone.
Why is it tense?
Because the AOC and the very young generation is on a warpath to say that the present, adults and older people, and Dianne Feinstein, I think, is quite a bit older, have been irresponsible and have left the children and the rising population with a potentially, destroy the planet. Wasn't it in 12 years?
She's like, please, children, you don't even know about the Chinese spies driving me around.
Right. I gave the Green New Deal plan to China.
Right. They loved it.
So with that, to understand these awards that are coming out, we need to just quickly make sure that our audience is on the same page here. Okay. So the first thing is that the Clinton Foundation, based in Little Rock, has never been authorized to do any work outside of Little Rock.
People are shocked when you tell them that. They don't know what to say to that.
Here's chapter and verse. Here's the question that is in the 1023 application for federal tax exemption. It says, doesn't say provide some information. It says provide detailed description of all the activities of the organization, past, present, and planned. Not some of them.
That includes trips to the strip club.
Exactly, everything. And the massage parlor. Right. And then it says each description should include, as a minimum, it doesn't say as a maximum, as a minimum, the following: a detailed description of the activity, including its purpose, and how each activity furthers your exempt purpose. In other words, you say your purpose is to be an archive, and then you have activities that further those purposes. You have to say, why does flying around the world with Jeffrey Epstein and Ron Burkle and a whole bunch of other people to Africa and Asia and Caribbean, why does that help me put up a presidential records repository in Little Rock? The answer is it doesn't. When the activity was or will be initiated, and where and by whom the activity will be conducted. Okay? So the answer that was provided on December 23rd, 1997, just as Vernon Jordan, it's alleged, and Bill Clinton and various people were trying to bribe Monica Lewinsky to stop her from telling the truth about what Bill and she had been doing and lots of other issues. The answer here is the foundation is going to construct and initially endow a presidential archival facility. Initially endow, i.e. on November 18th, 2004, when the facility comes into being. At no point has the Clinton Foundation ever had the authority to have an unrestricted endowment to do whatever the hell it wants to do, which is what Dennis Cheng and the Clintons began trying to raise in 2011. It never had any authority for that. And then constructing and maintaining related research and educational facilities and activities. And I put this in uppercase. The Presidential Library and related facilities will be constructed in a city park to be established for the purpose in where, Jason?
Little Rock.
Nowhere else. Not New York, not Hot Springs, not California, not London, not Sweden, not Canada, not Africa, not Asia, none of those places. It's just in Little Rock, okay? Then it also was established as a public charity. Now, you see those words, public charity, and you say, oh, I know what that means. And most people don't know what that means. What that means is a public charity serves the public at large. It's not a vehicle to give Chelsea Clinton an apartment, an expensive apartment, or the Clintons multiple mansions, or to cover off travel expenses, or to fund political campaigns. No. It's a public charity is to serve the general public. And in this application, they very specifically said they were going to be a place to hold presidential records created or received during the Clinton presidency, and then allowing scholars from across the political spectrum and members of the public to study those records in Little Rock. That's what this is for, right? That's it, okay? And you can retrieve, if you don't believe me, you can go to Arkansas, you can go on their online business entity search at the Secretary of State's office, and you can get all the paperwork for yourself. That is to say, the paperwork that's on file, some of which I believe has been forged.
Yeah, we've been over that.
Right. So if we can just stay, yeah. So it's not clear that all of the presidential records that were created or received during Bill Clinton's presidency are today in that Little Rock facility. To me, there's evidence in the public domain that a lot of additional material was probably taken out of the National Archives or taken out of temporary storage facilities where it shouldn't have been in the first place. And that information would be the information that makes the Clintons look bad or embarrassing or whatever.
Yeah.
So the first step would be, if we want to give a new job to the FBI, go back and look at all of the purported transfers out of the National Archives to this interim facility. That those transfers started, I believe, in 2000 while Bill was still president, and then continued in 2001. Go back through the packing slips and how did those things get here and there, and who were the people involved in deciding what records were presidential records and what weren't. You got to go back and do that work, and I think you're going to find that just as the 33,000 emails, are not all of Hillary Clinton's emails, that the presidential records that are in Little Rock are not all the records, and each destruction, you've been to a National Archive.
Yeah, they make you watch a film about what not to do there.
Right, you don't want to be Sandy Burglar,
They say taking anything out of there is a federal offense, and you will get smashed.
So the starting place for these guys is they said, you know what? We're gonna make sure. And Bill Clinton, we know from the book that we've been over by Taylor Branch, Bill Clinton definitely knew that the records he was creating or receiving during his presidency would have historical value, and he was thinking about that weeks, if not months, before he even swore out his first oath of office. So he had it in his mind, he appreciated the value of these records. Now, it is abundantly clear that the Clinton Foundation changed its activities and changed its purposes on paper, not on paper, it de facto changed it without making the required changes that it was supposed to make, and without explaining those changes to the IRS and to the various state, federal, and foreign regulators. We have had this up before, but if you see, when you get your tax exemption, it doesn't say, hey, Jason, you got tax exemption because we like you. It says, based on the information you supplied. This here, the 1023. Base and assuming your operations will be as stated in your application for recognition of exemption, okay? You get a conditional approval to have tax exemption, not a blanket authority to do whatever you want. And the IRS puts you on notice and says if you change your sources of support, your purposes, your character, which, that's an interesting topic for the Clintons, your character, or method of operation, please let us know. And they're not saying that to be nice.
Yeah.
They're not saying it to be nice. What you read in the underlying documents, the detailed documents of regulation is, if you change your purpose and you change your activities without telling the IRS first, the IRS can revoke your tax authority. And they should do that in this case. So here's some important background as you consider these awards. Go to the next page. It's my contention that this Clinton Foundation is nothing more than a conspiracy, actually, a real-life, still running conspiracy. Yeah, not a theory. It's a conspiracy involving Bill Clinton, Ira Magaziner, and the accounting firm BKD and others to steal money from taxpayers of multiple governments and to divert money from the many donors, some of whom are willingly playing along with the Clinton Foundation. Now, you see, we're going to do this slightly different approach. In the 2008 marketing puff piece that's on the Clinton website. I mean, we have a link to it down there. You don't have to. It says, this was produced in 2009, that since 2002, the Clinton, notice it doesn't say Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, but calls it CHI, has worked with governments and other partners to increase access to high-quality HIV/AIDS care and treatment since 2002. This is the Clinton Foundation bragging about this. Okay? On their tax forms, starting with regard to 2002, there's no such disclosure that they changed their purposes. They lie on the tax forms, and all their state forms, and all their foreign forms. And it says, country operations for this CHI assist governments in making complex health systems work more efficiently. Chances are the way they did this is strictly forbidden. Is not, you cannot ask American taxpayers to subsidize the activities of foreign governments to benefit foreign populations. That is not a tax-deductible approach.
Right.
Right? Now, if you go back then to this form that was submitted, this 1023 that was submitted for this new entity called Clinton Health Access Initiative, and that thing was submitted on December 31st, 2009, you won't find it on any of the Clinton websites. On the CHI website, you won't find it on the Clinton Health Access Initiative website or on the Clinton Foundation website. You're not going to find it there. You will find it in New York State. And remember, this was submitted December 31st, 2009, and you have to fill it all out truthfully. And I didn't want to devote the whole show to the many errors that are in this form, because we could go on for hours and hours and hours. But just to give you the high points, in Part 4 of this 1023, you're asked to provide a narrative description of your activities. They provide nothing, not a word, nothing. Then they say it's not a successor organization in your history, Part 7, and of course it is, as we're going to show you momentarily. And then in this specific activities, they ask you lots of questions. How did you fundraise in each state? Do donors maintain separate accounts? Do you have affiliations with governments? Are you doing economic development? Are you letting outsiders develop facilities or manage anything? Do you have any family relationships? Are you into any joint ventures with anybody? Are you keeping intellectual property rights? And if so, why? Are you accepting non-cash contributions? If so, why? What foreign activities do you have? What grants are you going to make to these foreign entities? What close connections might you have to different organizations and for-profit entities? And are you going to be providing medical care? False answers to all these questions in a document that is not on the Clinton Foundation website, because if it were, people would be saying this is a total fraud.
Well, but we gave more true answers than false.
Right. And then you have to give financial information for 2009. And of course, that's omitted. Right?
Yeah.
So to do this, BKD was not simply, just an auditor. They were providing tax preparation work. Their name was used in connection with state and foreign filings.
They brought the tigers.
They brought the tigers. They went on and did this for multiple years, multiple entities, not just the main foundation, but also Clinton Health Access Initiative and Clinton Global Initiative. So real investigators, this is a period when these people were using emails. Real investigators would be able to go into email accounts, go into primary source documents with a full force of grand juries and FBI agents doing midnight raids and weekend raids. And the amount of incriminating information that would come out of the exercise of separately interviewing the BKD people, a magaziner, and potential whistleblowers, and different BKD accounts who can't hide behind privilege. I mean, by now, you should have at least 100 indictments, at least, just following this scheme. And the question I would have for the FBI is, when we ultimately see what they've been doing, is who told FBI agents to pull their punches? When did they tell them? And why has it taken so long for the FBI to get up to the kind of fighting position they should now, and I believe now may be in? Who was the impediment to doing the job here?
Could his name start with Andrew McCabe?
I think it starts with Barack and ends with starts with Barack and ends with Obama. If it doesn't start with Valerie and end with Jarrett.
Maybe all of the above.
Yeah, and Loretta Lynch and Eric Holder, among others. So if we go to the next page.
If they pass that anti-lynching law, how will that affect Loretta Lynch?
So BKD, I would argue, is centrally involved. You know, if Mueller and Weissman can take down Arthur Anderson and ultimately fail at the Supreme Court, right? If they're prepared to do that over the Enron matter, they absolutely, somebody needs to go after BKD hard, because this is not just, I've only put a few of the things that they've done here, covering the period 2001 to 2011. They provided audit and tax services in each year, and generally speaking, it's not a good idea for a large, complex charity to have the same accounting firm prepare a theoretically independent audit as does your tax return, because there are conflicts. And if you make a mistake with the audit, it affects the tax return and vice versa. So from 2001 to 2004, BKD allowed its name to be put on a completely unacceptable, in quotes, audit for the foundation. In the first year, in 2001, I don't think they were validly licensed as accountants in Arkansas under the name BKD LLP. Starting in 2002, I wonder whether BKD was purposefully chosen as a firm that was not strong enough to have offices in New York and Massachusetts and places where the Clinton Foundation was beginning to provide services and pursue.
What do you mean? Why would they want that?
They would want an accounting firm that would just content itself with looking at Little Rock and say, well, you know, our mandate was never to look in New York, and we can give you this audit because you tell us that you're supposed to be an archive in Little Rock, and if you tell us that's what you're doing, we'll give you the audit. We won't bother to check to see. And in these periods, the the amounts declared for accounting fees are de minimis. So I think this was just window dressing in the very beginning, and then query. You know, we have in 2001, 2, 3, and 4, and part of 2005, we have the Department of Justice and the IRS and the FBI investigating the Clinton Foundation. Why did the Clintons feel so strong under the first 4 years of the George Bush presidency that they could, you know, ignore an FBI investigation and not have real accountants on the case? Was it perhaps because they replaced the head of the FBI and put in Bob Mueller September 4th, 2001, and that right after then in December, James Comey replaced Mary Jo White as the lead U.S. attorney investigating the Clinton Foundation? I think that needs to be studied incredibly closely. How, in this time frame, was the first Clinton Foundation investigation stymied? You know, and who were the people involved with that? Who did the work there? Who told them not to study this obvious fraud as it mushroomed? You know, how many of those people might still be on the special counsel's team, indeed even leading it? So this is a critical period. And then, you know, it continues on, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, fake audit after fake audit, fake term after fake term. And then in 10 and 11, BKD is involved creating this new entity with the same acronym, CHI, as the old entity, CHI. Don't tell me that BKD people didn't know that this was a massive fraud and decided that they were they were in too deep, they couldn't turn themselves in, so they just decided to keep playing along. Now, for those people, if you look in here and hit this blue link, if there are people with spare time on their hands, you know, who might be interested in examining our videos, it's worthwhile reading through this section in the IRS. Now, Messrs. Doyle and Moynihan have already filed a complaint with the IRS. They disclosed that in their congressional hearing. There are lots of facets of this massive fraud. It's not just the Clinton Foundation. There are multiple entities. Complaints can be filed against accounting firms, against law firms, against donors, against executives. And this is a portal to a lot of information of how this all works. So I thought it would be useful to put that out to the crowd. Some of you do have time and the inclination to roll up your sleeves and do something about this. So, and as I think about BKD, I mean, we gave Eric Hansen, how many videos did we do about Eric Hansen? I mean, 2 or 3, several.
We've been kind of cracking on him for a little while.
Well, we gave him a chance to do the right thing, to have a man for all seasons moment. And
I mean, I can't say that he's necessarily seen these videos. I don't ever presume that the people that we're talking about actually see the videos, although it's possible.
I think he's probably seen these, but I don't know. So
Well, he did come out with some kind of video of his own after we started talking about him, and it got like 20 views.
20 views, that's good.
Maybe 40, and one of them was me.
The other 39 were his family.
Yeah, the tiger was watching.
The tiger was watching, okay. So if we go to the next, all right, this is one that, I'm sorry that it's numbers, Jason, but
I don't mind.
For we numbers types, okay, this is information that is taken from a page that is pages that are purposefully omitted from the Clinton Foundation versions of BKD's work for 2007, 8, and 9. These are entries taken from what are called combining financial statements for the various pieces, purported pieces of the Clinton Foundation. Now, the most important accountants will tell you that if you can't keep track of your revenues, that then you're basically done. I mean, if you can't keep track of, the most important stuff that comes in the front door, chances are you're going to miss everything else. And so the most important thing that comes into a charity's front door is a grant. And this information that is missing from the Clinton Foundation versions on purpose, somebody went to considerable lengths to have these two sets of pages disappear from the Clinton Foundation version on their website, shows that 99% of all the grants that occurred from 2007 to 2009 went to where? Went to an entity called Old Chai. Right? 99, substantially all of the grants went from governments, from big foundations, all of them went to this entity which legally did not exist. Okay?
That's awesome.
And we're talking about 307 million. We're talking about an amount that is almost twice as much as they claim they spent to put up the Little Rock campus.
Wow.
We're talking about a period after the Little Rock campus was finished. And nobody in the Clinton Foundation among the trustees said, now wait a minute, we haven't changed our purposes. We haven't notified the IRS we've changed our activities. We're only supposed to be doing work in Little Rock. That work is finished. Somehow we're declaring that we raised $307 million for grants, and all of that money went to this entity over here, CHI, Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, which was operating through March 31st, 2008 in Massachusetts, and which was illegally operating the entire period, but was barred from operating with effect from December 31st, 2007 forward. We're going to put out financial statements and have our accounting firm disseminate these statements, and they're going to show that this CHI that didn't exist got $300 million. I mean, that would seem to be
possibly go wrong?
A tad risky, just a tad risky. And then for CHI itself, the most important expense of a charity from a regulatory standpoint and from thinking about, is this a fraud or not, are what are called program expenses, the monies that you say are being spent for your authorized purposes. Well, they say that New CHI they took in $307 million, but they only spent $189 million on programs. Now, none of the programs that CHI pursued were lawfully authorized, but let's assume they were, right? Why did they only spend $189 on programs and then spend $66 million on professional fees and consulting? I mean, that's tough to do. $66 million in 3 years. That's $20 million a year. More than $20 million a year for consultants.
Who's consulting with them?
I don't know.
And that's separate from lawyers and...
Some professional fees would be in here for lawyers, but you spend another $20 million on travel.
It's crazy.
And my personal favorite in a financial statement is when you see other is $72 million.
But just on the travel, Charles, how many employees are there of the whole thing? And how much is that per employee, per travel? Because you start to break it down like that, and it would become really ridiculous.
It's absurd. It's an absurd amount of money. And it's just you look at this, and the reason this is not on the Clinton Foundation website is because if it were,
you'd know right away. That's like a travel budget for a company with thousands of people traveling.
Right. And this, we don't even know, travel policy, according to the memos that you can find, is coach, except for who? Except for Bill and Chelsea and Hillary.
Right.
And Hillary should not have been traveling at all in this period. Chelsea wasn't affiliated with the foundation, so it's Bill's travel. How do you spend?
You got a license. I mean, you got to charter that Lolita jet. That's costly.
They claim, the various and sundry guys, Epstein and others, and Burkle claim that they donated the use of the jet. So
that's not included in it, or is that
we don't
kind?
know. The point is, you just simply don't know. But the one thing I can tell you is that this is like, an admission against interest. This is what this is. This is, they volunteer this information, they put it out in the public domain, they realize, holy shit, we can't put this on our website, the primary place where people, because it's so incriminating. Let's hope that nobody's going to do what Charles is going to do, and nobody's going to ask you to look through this. But so this is very clearly CHAI, a highly material piece of the Clinton Foundation. In 2007, it's almost 100% of their grants come to this thing, CHAI. They don't go for Little Rock, and over 90% of the declared program expenses are in CHAI, and more than half of the overhead is absorbed by CHAI. So you can't say the existence of CHAI doesn't matter. It's centrally material. The thing absolutely existed, and it carried over, its activities carried over into 2010, 11, and 12. But the Clinton Foundation, before Lois Lerner, said, no, this CHAI, it's nothing to do with the old CHAI, nothing at all. So now we're going to get to some of the awards.
Ah, yes.
The first award is for a charity fraudster with a foreign accent, and that would be the government of Australia. So here we have Alexander Downer is a name that people will remember. He was, I think until recently, he may still be the Australian ambassador to the United Kingdom. But back in 2006, he was the foreign minister. And the people in Australia, leadership in Australia, were enamored of this Clinton Foundation. Now remember, previous show we showed you that the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative certainly did not merge on December 31st, 2005 lawfully into the Clinton Foundation. It certainly didn't. But by February of 2006, Downer says, g'day mate, we'll give you $25 million for something that doesn't exist because I get to meet you in Sydney. We'll sign this MOU. You're not associated with this Bill Clinton, but I'm in the same room with you. Some of your magic will wear off on me, Alexander Downer. Of course I'll give you $25 million. No problem.
Couple drinks with Papadopoulos.
Exactly, and then I'll sort out Papadopoulos later on. But you read this thing, this is lifted. If you hit this report, this link here, this is dated July 2009. Okay, this is a review that this vaunted expert, independent expert, it looks pretty fancy, right?
Well, it looks like a
58-page report. Got a fancy name, UniQuest. And this is sorry. Slow down here. Thank you. You see here it says they're checking into Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative. The first question you might ask: did it exist?
Yeah.
Nowhere in the 58-page memorandum is that question addressed.
Well, it's like that technical support call where the first question is it plugged in?
Right, exactly. That's right.
Turn it on.
Do the batteries work? But, and it's just, here's the person who's doing this. Now, it seems like maybe this person is a genius. Doesn't strike me that she is. But her name is Alison Haywood.
I'm not going to say it, but that reminds me of a high school joke.
All right. Is director of Haywood Public Health Group. Right?
Haywood.
She's done work in, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, all of these places that, none of these places are corrupt. None of these places are far flung. And she's affiliated with the Global Fund and the Gavi Alliance, which is another, these are each gigantic consortiums to buy medicine, to distribute to poor countries, okay? So here's this person who writes this is a draft report in July of 2009 about an entity that should have been liquidated out of existence on December 31st, 2005, that never has provided to the public any evidence that it was validly authorized as a tax-exempt entity. And now, this is July 2009.
East Timor.
Yeah, I mean, she gets...
Everything's tightly locked down.
Yeah, exactly. And this report centers on the government, on what the Clinton Foundation may have been doing in Papua New Guinea, which is hopelessly corrupt. On these lists of countries that people go and say, what are the most and least corrupt countries? New Guinea is definitely up there as a very corrupt country.
Where is the old Guinea?
There was one in Africa, but that's a different. It's
that
no
wasn't
relation.
doing well, so they just abolished it and made a whole new one.
So anyway, this report is actually so poor I mean, it's an embarrassment. It goes in, it's one of these hopeful reports. They hope you're just going to read the executive summary, not read the details. You know, the executive summary, it's all, well, you know, we followed this set of protocols, and we really care deeply about charity and the integrity of charity work and this and that. And we have some constructive suggestions, and you know, it's kind of the kind of stuff you'll sleep through. But then you get to the details. It's like Downer got together and gave this entity $25 million with no clear mandate as to what to do. So we have no idea what it did because there are no controls, and we now want to give it more money. I mean, it's a clear example of why governments and donors should be very nervous about giving money internationally to countries in regions where there's little infrastructure and a tradition of corruption. You should be very nervous about this, and the last thing you want to do to check it out is to hire somebody like Alison Haywood, who you may have some professional reputation, but she's not going to be able to come up with 25 million Australian to get you your money back. You should be hiring somebody who could be on the hook for $25 million.
Do we have any indication why Downer did this? Did he receive some personal benefit?
Possibly. He's independently wealthy. It's more likely that the top leadership group of these countries, the president, the prime minister, the foreign ministers, you know, they start thinking ahead what they're going to do after they leave out of office, and they like to be affiliated to some stream of money to finance their lifestyles if they're not rich. And so what better way to do that than to become involved with Downer's various small banking and advisory firms, but also large charities that could get continuing government grants from Australia and other governments. So it's an invirtuous circle. You know, the people who are supposed to make these grants at government level have massive conflicts of interest. These are very complicated things to study. It would require a lot of time and money to go out to Papua New Guinea and try to find out what happened to this money. But it says here, in August of 2006, okay, this is when the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative absolutely did not exist. A funding agreement was signed where Australian aid agreed to give $10.2 million to support the CHI initiative in Papua New Guinea. And you would think that if the Clinton Foundation and Magaziner were legitimate people, they might have told, before July 2009, they might have read this Alison Haywood into the fact that, actually in June, July timeframe 2008, Magaziner and the CEO of the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative, in theory, went into the board and said, we just basically lost a lot of money. We don't know what happened to it. You'd probably want to admit that, but they didn't. Now, Michael Smith has done fantastic work. We brought him up. We've had him on the show several times, but if you, he's based out in Asia now. This is a piece where he catalogs some of the problems he had found by November of 2016, rather. If you go just quickly scroll through this, this is just a few little pieces here. The odd, just a few.
That's quite a list.
43 different ones. Okay, so people are looking for facts on Australia's deplorable record of supporting an obvious set of frauds. If people are wondering why Alexander Downer might have had a motivation to attack Trump via Papadopoulos, here's one of the reasons, in my view. And there's a lot more here. Michael Smith is a retired police detective from Australia.
Well, see, it's very interesting also how they have all these different people involved. And so when these leaders from different countries come out and say, this thing, that thing about Donald Trump, it creates the appearance to people watching at home on the news, oh, look, everybody around the world thinks Trump is terrible. Right. When in fact, everybody around the world is in crooked business with the Clintons.
Right. So that's the first ORTEL award, Government of Australia. The second...
And specifically Andrew Downer.
Exactly. And the second now goes, we're in the foreign section here, so the second goes to the government of Norway. Now this is Norwegian krona, and my point to you about currency values come and go, we don't know when these grants flowed from Norway and to which pieces of the Clinton Foundation. We don't know whether they went to Massachusetts or New York or direct to an international location, so I didn't even try to turn these into dollars. a rough rule of thumb, divide by 10 or so. So you're talking all in $12 million in this time frame, 2007 to 2009. They step up their contributions after 2009. Okay, but I'm just focused on years when the HIV/AIDS initiative did not exist legally. Okay, in those years, the government of Norway said, "Okay, we'll give you $12 million or more." And here's a recent story. I don't know if it's going to work.
Didn't Norway put all its bankers in jail after the 2008 crisis? Or
I think that's Iceland.
Iceland, right?
Okay, now I don't know if this is going to work.
What do you mean?
It did work. Okay. This is a story that I've somehow managed to translate using Google Translate from Norwegian. That people want background on some of the alleged ties.
You know what he's saying? You have no idea where this finger has been.
You are bad. So this is right after the election in 2016. A very lengthy article going through some of the problems. Many of the problems that have yet to be fully explored and prosecuted, frankly, involving misuse of money sourced by the Clinton Foundation in Norway. And it's a very lengthy story, and I'm told by one of our most loyal viewers that the situation in Norway is actually moving in the correct direction. People are really, after many months of disbelief, they are now starting to take the hard look that needs to be taken at what actually happened to their money. And the good news for Australians and the good news for Norwegians is we can show you how to get your money back.
Yeah.
You can get your money back.
How do you like Hillary's hair in this picture?
Looks good. Probably not a recent picture.
No, I mean, it's got this like weird color light on there.
So if we move it along, Jason, because I've got three
Sure.
more awards to give out here.
Okay.
Now this one is really sad, actually.
Oh.
This is the Children's Investment Fund, and you know.
Oh yeah.
And this is one of the first ones we talked about almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But
I think it was the very first episode of Sunday with Charles.
So the Children's Investment Fund was set up as there's an actual investment fund, and people flocked to it because this young couple that organized the investment fund and the Companion Foundation said, we're going to give a bunch of money out of our investment winnings to help children around the world.
What was the idea? The profits of it went to charity?
So a slice of it went to charity. And really what I would argue it was is they didn't have an investment fund at the time they set up the foundation, but the announcement that the
Children's RICO operation doesn't really roll off the tongue as well.
Well, they realized, because they watched the Clintons do it and others do it, that when you say you're going to do something to help children, people will give lots of money. And here they were in their 30s, and the husband had a decent track record as a hedge fund manager. He wanted to go out on his own, and this created a special new approach to a hedge fund that enough rich people liked, and his earlier returns were really good. So they went from a couple with an idea about how to do a foundation and a hedge fund to creating a very valuable hedge fund complex. And I would argue that whole process was criminal inurement. In other words, this wasn't about charity. It was primarily about making them very, very wealthy, which happened. And this is taken from a June 5th, 2009 filing. Remember that the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative did not exist at this point. And it says that the UK version continues to invest in uppercase the William J. Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative, which didn't exist. There was no such thing.
Well.
Right? And through this mother-to-child transmission, is something that was never authorized for the Clinton Foundation. And it also talks about an entity called the Clinton Foundation that doesn't exist. There's no such thing. Again, it talks about it twice. A lot of happy horse shit in the words about we're going to do this. My personal favorite in this summary is this bullet here. Rigorous operational research, monitoring, and evaluation to build the evidence base to affect global and national policy and practice change.
Why is it not letting me highlight it? That's weird.
I don't know.
I sometimes like to highlight it so people know exactly where you are in the page.
It's just...
So they want to rigorous Operational research monitoring.
Or this one above it here, this bullet, scaling upward, I should say upward, optimizing of a mix of key intervention during the PMTCT cascade.
What is that?
What language is that in? It's just, this is gibberish, right? It does not make any sense, and they should have, and these are people who should have, their whole shtick on investment fund management is we're more careful than the average fund manager. We check details a lot more rigorously. Give us your money. We're not going to get caught by fraud. You look in so many words, then you look at the scale of money that they gave to this Clinton Foundation. In 2006, they gave 2.9 million pounds. 2007, 4.7 million pounds. 2008, 12 million pounds, for a total of nearly 20 million pounds. You're talking about close to $40 million in 6, 7, and 8 years where there was no such thing as the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative. And these amounts represent 44% of all the grants made by this charity. So there's something very seriously wrong here. And it may actually be, this may have been one of the factors that contributed to the divorce of the couple.
Maybe one of them was like, hey, this is crooked, and the other one was like, shut up.
Yeah, could well be. And I don't know, but...
Didn't the wife get a lot of money from
the largest award to date, I think, ever given in a divorce?
Bigger than Paul McCartney, bigger than Phil Collins?
Oh, massive, yeah, hundreds of millions.
Huh.
Yeah.
I saw Phil Collins in an elevator one time. He has throat cancer, I think.
Really?
Can't sing
good
anymore.
singer. So this is the third award, definitely the Children's Investment Fund. Any charity that is rumored to be doing anything for children internationally should fall under an extremely strict regulation protocol.
Yeah.
The second you go on the internet with celebrities start saying this is for the children, you're going to get a lot of money, and that's where abuse is going to happen, not directly by these people, but maybe under their watch in all these countries. This is a high degree of difficulty to get done properly, and there's too much evidence, sadly, in the public domain that it doesn't work.
Charles, we did a really important show yesterday with a former member of GDSE, which is the French equivalent of the CIA, and this was all about the missing princess of Dubai, Princess Latifa. I know a lot of people in the United States maybe haven't heard too much about this story, but the Sheikh of Dubai, Sheikh Maktoum, is involved in something with the Clinton Foundation called Dubai Cares. And this story was brought to my attention by Hector, who you introduced me to, who's very involved in horse abuse, and he's he's
protesting horse
trying
abuse.
to stop it. Very involved in pointing it out and trying to stop it. And Sheikh Maktoum has this Dubai Cares, which is somehow affiliated with the Clinton Foundation. It had just had all children's charities involved, and he's also accused of importing children from other countries to be these jockey boys who are abused in the course of the whole equestrian whatever they've got going on over there.
It's bad stuff. Well, and one other thing to mention here, this is information at the top from the UK fund. We have a foundation. We've also done presentations in the past about the U.S. foundation, and that's also called the Children's Investment Fund. And we don't want to regurgitate all the details we gave you before, but the low point, is that somehow that charity manages to give money to Clinton Foundation entities with the wrong name and incorrect addresses, and to one charity that was so bad that even the Obama administration, under the Obama administration, the U.S. government stopped funding a charity that this U.S. version continued to fund. So something is very rotten with the administration, in my mind, of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation historical grants. And just because the leader of the Children's Investment Fund, the husband, is a billionaire and now is Sir whatever, does not mean
Sir whatever.
That regulators shouldn't go back into this and make a serious example of this. I think a lot of people gave money to this Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative because they saw the Children's Investment Fund with its reputation. I mean, the fund portion of it was very much involved in hostile raids across Europe and in Japan. And
what do you mean?
It's a very big hedge fund, gigantic hedge fund.
Oh, raids, like you mean hostile takeovers?
Yeah, yeah. and upsetting the establishment. They pissed off a lot of people. They caused lots of people to lose money and jobs, etc.
So on the one hand, it's this aggressive, capitalist-focused, fund that just doesn't care about anything but money, and then on the other hand, it's supposedly helping children. Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly. So the helping children part kind of gives you a pass
for being a jerk to everybody else.
Right. and this behavior cannot...
Well, it puts it into question, too, because...
Right. Should put it into question.
Yeah.
Which is why it gets an award. So...
we should remind people that these awards are for the biggest frauds.
Right. And getting now to a very large fraud, if not perhaps the biggest one out there, is, in my mind, the Gates Foundation, people have different schools of thought on the Gates Foundation. I think it was a guilty conscience Kobe Bryant type of ring approach that Bill had been, Microsoft had been so aggressive securing a near monopoly of the software market and he had made so much money, and he was under scrutiny in the US when Bill Clinton was president, antitrust scrutiny, and Europe was thirsting to get him. It was in the late 90s, early 2000s that the Gates Foundation decided it needed a mission. And the mission became global health, specifically fighting HIV, AIDS, and other diseases like that around the world. And they to draft this plan, they employed, who else? McKinsey. And who was very much involved at McKinsey doing all this? None other than Rajat Gupta, who subsequently spent time in prison. I think we don't need to hit this link, Jason, but if people want to look at the Gates Foundation filings, it's one of the biggest foundations, if not the biggest in the world. They have the resources to do their work properly. Yet they don't provide the key incorporation documents defining what their charter is specifically or their bylaws is specifically. I like to see that up on the website. When I try to find it in Washington State, I can't find it. Maybe somebody in the crowd can find it. But this fellow, Joe Conason, we've sold some books for him in the past talking about his excellent work. I thought we should lift from page 341 of his book, Man of the World, some information. Everything in red is relevant. This says, during 2009, remember, the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative didn't exist in 2009 legally. Here Conason writes in a book that was published in September-October timeframe 2016, the Clinton, again, it's not called foundation in this case, HIV/AIDS initiative, the largest piece of the foundation, and another thing, the Clinton Climate Initiative, which didn't exist as well. There was discord, and this book alleges that major donors were made aware of the discord. This Elma Foundation, which is a music-related foundation, the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, which we just got through talking about, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation were, quote, drawn into the dispute. That means they had knowledge. Okay, what was their perspective? What would the FBI find if it raided Bill and Melinda Gates' foundation, in the morning, one Saturday morning, or the Children's Investment Fund Foundation or the Elma Foundation? What would they find in the record, emails, correspondence, about what these people knew in 2009 of the status of the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative and the Clinton Climate Initiative at a time when it supposedly didn't exist? Here it says that Magazine, or in the book, had persuaded these foundations to give millions to projects, right? And then there was a negotiation as to what happened. It says after 7 years, so starting in 2002, China's mission were too important to Bill Clinton and his post-presidency to walk away. So it was an integral piece of the foundation, according to this Conason book, 2009. Yet before the IRS on December 31st, 2009, Clinton Foundation, Clinton Health Access Initiative says, we're a new entity.
You said what yellow vest?
Right, what yellow vest, exactly. So anyway, they reorganize it, and then on December 10th, 2009, they issue an announcement saying that they've reorganized. They've taken an old entity and turned it into a new one. Yet, 21 days later, before Lois Lerner's IRS, they say, we're whole cloth, new thing. Okay? This is just portions of page 341. This is a long book with a lot of footnotes. It is to me, the FBI better already have bought this book and read it carefully, because it's going to save you a tremendous amount of time. They confess. This is a telling, with
they just write 302 on the cover and submit it.
Right. It's cheaper than sending a couple of FBI agents up to New York to sit down with Joe Conason for a few hours. Just go buy the book for $20 used. And this is just a piece of it. But the high-level takeaway is, why did the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative need to come into existence at all by 2004-05? There were many much larger organizations had been created before then, and Bill Gates' foundation knew all about it because his foundation was centrally involved creating all these gigantic slush funds.
And it's involved in that Dubai Cares organization.
Right. Oh, it's involved in many, many things. So Gates Foundation and McKinsey jointly should share this award because they are, to me, the prime advocates for feudalism, for unregulated globalism, and for using loosely, in quotes, controlled and regulated internationally based foundations to move money around the world for suspect causes that nobody really figures out what's going on.
Jason Gruthius suggests that we should have Oprah on and she could go, an indictment for you, an indictment for you.
Very good, I like that.
We've also got a question coming from Picking for a Cause about El Chapo and possible financial contributions to members of Congress, but perhaps that's for another show.
Another show, yeah.
We
So we're almost keeping to our deadline here. I'm just going to go to the final, the next page. The final ORTEL award has to go to Unitaid. And Unitaid is frankly an entity that shouldn't exist. There's no reason for this entity. There was, we go back into the history. In 2001, this Unitaid has given $650 million to the Clinton Foundation. $650 million, okay? Primarily, almost exclusively, directed towards the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative, which never existed legally. $650 million, multiple wires. We don't even have the details of all the wires that went at which moment in time.
It's got wires coming out everywhere.
And I think if it's not the biggest, in the early years, the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative in 6, 7, 8, 9 got about a half of all the money that Unitaid sent out of the entity for grants, went to an entity that didn't exist.
And did all the money for Unitaid come from charging people $30 per plane ticket to go to France, or is that just a part of it?
It's different countries, different ways. So France is the biggest donor by far. France collected its money that way from travelers through France.
Which the travelers really didn't even know that, did they?
Pretty much not. And then different other countries collected the monies different ways. Norway off a carbon tax.
Getting taxed by a country that you're not even in.
Right. But so in 2001, Rajat Gupta and McKinsey start working really after Bill Clinton, leaves the White House in disgrace. They start working very closely with Clinton on various projects, including the America-India Fund, which we've talked about, but also this Clinton Foundation. Then later in 2001, the Global Fund, which is a gigantic operation. It's, I think today, distributed $20 billion to fight HIV/AIDS and other diseases around the world or more. That gets organized in Switzerland. Then by 2002, the Clintons personally are being paid off by Rajat Gupta through something called MindSpirit LLC, where this entity, which I think was highly questionable to begin with, Rajat Gupta was running McKinsey. He shouldn't have been having a side deal over here, MindSpirit. And he was also involved with Bill Clinton in the American-India Foundation. And Chelsea was ending up working for McKinsey. I mean, all this stuff needed to be disclosed in Clinton Foundation filings, and it's never been disclosed. F that. And then McKinsey is also looking ahead at these global health practices and saying, all right, we see the future on global health care. We should be working with these generic medicine companies to build their profits. We should be working with these test kit companies. Who knows how much money people close to McKinsey may have made off of the escalation of value in Ranbaxy and other Indian generic and other generic medicine places and test kits around the world. None of this disclosure has been teased yet out. And this could have been teased out by the FBI when it had an open investigation in the Clinton Foundation. It should have encompassed the American-India Foundation and other Bill Clinton matters, but it didn't. By 2003, early in January, or in January 2003, George Bush announces a $15 billion plan to send U.S. money to buy drugs, to buy HIV/AIDS medicines and give them away for free. Then in 2004, we know about Bruce Lindsay illegally creating this entity in Arkansas, filling the first false and materially misleading sequel to the false and materially misleading original application, December 23rd, 1997. Countries get together in New York and say, we're going to fight AIDS. The Clinton Foundation decides to defraud the National Archives on November 18th, 2004, not being straight with them about what was really going on, how the foundation had changed its purposes illegally. By the 14th of September, nations get together talking about a new way of financing development and drugs. There's this merger we talked about in the last thing, whose effective date, in theory, had people complied with the applicable statutes and regulations, would have occurred on that date. But it's a fake merger. It was never perfected legally. And the Clintons and Magaziner and others went around the world to Unitaid, to multiple governments, to multiple donors, saying, yeah, we could do this. Unitaid was only supposed to give money to organizations that already existed, that were filling the mission that Unitaid wanted to finance. The Clinton Foundation was never authorized for this purpose. In the February 28th, March 1st, 2006, there's a high-level conference on HIV/AIDS and development. Then there's one in New York on June 2nd, where 4 countries, not yet the UK, get together and say, we're going to do Unitaid. So it matters between the 2nd of June 2006 and September 2006, when the UK gets dragged along into Unitaid, it matters what Unitaid and the Clinton Foundation was saying to the UK, and it matters what the UK knew about the true state of affairs involving the Clinton Foundation and its HIV/AIDS initiative activities, because we have emails provided by the Irish government going back to 2003 that document that elements of the UK government certainly knew the Clinton Foundation was involved fighting HIV/AIDS internationally. They probably had not done their due diligence to figure out that the Clinton Foundation was doing such work illegally. But you look at this from the first day that Unitaid sprang into existence on September 19th, 2006, the premise that it could work, you could select the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative and the Clinton Foundation as its most important partner, is an absurd premise that demonstrates that this was a setup for the start, and if you can't get the first year correct, there's never been an audit for 2006 of Unitaid, independent audit. They've tried to slide and glide through this. They continue to exist. At one point there was talk that if AOC and others before AOC are successful in having a global carbon tax, that money was supposed to go to Unitaid. So Unitaid could give it out to other crooked outfits like the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative. So this is something that the business as usual of letting international charities, supposed charities, operate out of Geneva, Switzerland, above national law, under the protection of the World Health Organization and other multilateral schemes, is the essence of unregulated globalism and feudalism. Futilism, exactly. And so that's
Oh, that's it.
That's it.
Wow. Charles, you rocketed through that.
And we have, however, one this just in.
Oh, yes, and this is an important one. Let me find that, because I don't think I had a chance to load it, but this is something that came up last night. We were talking with Larry Klayman about it. I think if we just say Politico 200, that's interesting. It's not coming up right away. But it was this top 2. Here it is. Sustained and ongoing disinformation assault.
Yep.
It's funny because that's what's been happening to me and to other people that we know, people putting out false stories. And it seems that a lot of the people that they list in this 200 Twitter accounts, they're bringing out true information. It's
right.
just not good if you're...
Well, this illustrates vividly the massive problem with the way in which unregulated globalism is operated, that people who understand how to abuse a system figure out what the choke points are. And when you appreciate that Facebook and Google and a few other portals are really responsible for a majority of the advertising lifeblood of many industries, and now for the dissemination of what passes for news, you realize that it doesn't take much to put you know, to put your arms around the neck of those companies and the executives, and you can make sure that critical stuff that should get out to the public doesn't go to the public, and you can also use those vehicles and the mainstream media to continue to spew propaganda as if it were real news. So it's, you know, we've reached a very dangerous point, I think, in the evolution of the global economy, where people with precious little journalistic experience are, you know, basically among the most important, in quotes, influence shapers on the planet, and people who in the past have really been regulated by journalists, or at least by the Fourth Estate, have found a way to game that whole process, so to cover up their swampy activities. And, you know, we really do, I think, need to band together across the political spectrum and say, oh, wait a minute. Globalism has not worked. We're spending 6.4 trillion a year on government. We're not getting much for it. A lot of the government officials are living large and acting in despicable ways, you know, around the world. There needs to be a resetting of that power balance.
Yeah.
And let's hope that happens soon.
Yeah, I mean, this list of 200 accounts, it seems very much like first they put together the list, then they ban you. It's so Nazi-esque, it's unbelievable. And it's also disappointing how so many are prone to, rather than addressing allegations with fact, they spin away, they talk about other things, they make up stories that aren't true and try to just, I don't even know what.
So thank you for many things, Jason, for, you know, setting the fashion
yes, it's
standards
here.
here.
It's the ORTELS. We've got a, you know, I love the statuette. We should have made those up and had some of the guests here to receive their awards.
Well, we could consider doing that and delivering them.
Yeah.
Sending them by Federal
I think
Express.
they're expensive. You know, these International 3D Society awards that I've won are allegedly made by the same company
Really?
that makes it. Well, yeah, and then when you get them, they charge you $750 to get the statue.
Really?
I
Same
mean,
for an Oscar?
This, I don't know about the Oscars, but I
Yeah.
presume it works in a similar fashion where they send you a letter that says, hey, you've won, and then they want you to like pay for a really expensive ticket to go to the award show to get the award, and also to actually pay for the statue.
So you don't think, was it last year where Price Waterhouse screwed up, or was it
I
2
think
years
so,
ago?
with Warren Beatty and...
Right. So you don't think the new accounting firm this year is going to be BKD, do you?
I think that would be great. They could be, we forgot to cut to this wonderful graphic of the people at BKD cooking the books over there, but there's no end to the laughs we're having at BKD's expense. But I mean, they're complicit in this fraud. It seems quite clear.
Yeah.
Well, Charles, it was another excellent episode. I do want to remind everyone that we've got a week's worth of wonderful shows. In addition to the shows that people see on YouTube and Periscope and Facebook and DLive and all of the free platforms that the show is on, if people go to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, they can become sponsors of the show. They're going to get access to lots of exclusive content. They help keep the show going, even if you don't want to watch that exclusive content. Even if you're just watching this show and this show only, $2 a month, I mean, it's less than you'd pay for one copy of the New York Times, and that seems to be filled with nonsense. So it would be great if more people could become sponsors of the show. We really need that financial support. It's very difficult to travel around the world talking to various people who are making news and getting these interviews and bringing the people the type of information that they want. So I hope that people will take the time to become sponsors. Charles, I want to thank you for your hard work in bringing this information forward. I'd say it's moving at a pace I would expect, you know, short of you or I getting elected Attorney General. There's nothing more we can do to move this any more quickly.
Right. Actually, I also want to thank you and thank our viewership. I attended a charity event on Friday night. It's called Cycle for Survival, and it started in 2007 in league with Memorial Sloan Kettering and Equinox Gym and some kind of New Balance clothing and some kind of water. But basically, it's focused on trying to channel research and development money the contributions are exclusively channeled to Sloan Kettering, which is a premier cancer operation here around the world, but here in New York primarily. And since 2007, this Cycle for Survival, and many events at once around the country, has raised over $200 million.
Wow.
And thank you to those of you who considered supporting this, and thank you for those who did support it financially. I would encourage people to actually go to the events, much as there are several things I don't like. I don't like crowds, I don't like noise, I don't like standing up for 4 hours.
What about spin classes? How do you like those?
but I mean, this was, even though these events incorporate all the above, it's a very moving experience, because you see people who've survived as a result of the research. You see families who are now supporting it, even though they've lost their loved ones. You see caregivers, and it's really something special. So thank you.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching. We'll be back tomorrow. Got Ole Damigard, Light on Conspiracies with Ole Damigard tomorrow. We're going to have John Carmen as our guest, and John is a former U.S. Border Patrol agent who was directly acquainted with Gary Webb and Chip Tatum and all these guys who were involved in revealing the illegal transportation of cocaine during the Iran-Contra scandal. So that should be an amazing show. And that's available only to subscribers. Ole is bringing some amazing guests. And then, of course, in the evening, we've got Unseen Libya with Jimmy and Joanne Moriarty. Jimmy just got over the flu, so hopefully people will tune in, sponsor the show, sponsor the guests, and we'll see everybody tomorrow. Thanks for watching.